I had a grandson who never said a word to me. Not once. Not in 4 years. People assume silence means absence. They look at a child who doesn't speak and they think, nobody's home. My son-in-law said it plainly at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, right in front of the boy, fork in hand like he was making a toast. Arthur just doesn't process things the way normal kids do. My daughter stared at her plate. Arthur sat there cutting his turkey into perfect little squares, methodical and quiet, and I watched his eyes. There was something behind them, something that understood exactly what had just been said. I kept that to myself. My name is Harold. I'm 67 years old. I live in a ranch house outside of Columbus, Ohio. The same house where I raised my daughter Melissa for 18 years. The backyard still has the tire swing I hung for her when she was 7. The kitchen still smells like the cedar wood cleaner my late wife Marion used every Saturday morning without fail. I don't use it anymore. I keep a bottle under the sink because the smell brings her back to me for a few seconds, and sometimes a few seconds is enough. Melissa is my only child. I used to think I did right by her. I'm still working through whether that's true. She married a man named Craig when she was 26. I tried to like him. I came close a few times. He had an easy smile and a firm handshake, and he always remembered to bring a bottle of wine when he came to dinner. For a while, I thought that meant something about a person's character. I've revised that opinion. Arthur was born 4 years into their marriage. He was a perfectly healthy baby. Curious eyes, strong grip, loud enough to rattle the windows when he was hungry. He hit his milestones early. He walked at 10 months. He started stacking blocks into elaborate structures at 14 months that I'm convinced were architecturally sound. Then, around age 2.5, the word stopped. Not gradually. Stopped. His pediatrician referred them to a specialist. Then another. The working explanation settled on selective mutism, a severe anxiety response that, in Arthur's case, had locked down his speech almost entirely. He could make sounds. He could hum. He'd been heard whispering to himself in his bedroom, according to Melissa. But to other people, in the world, Arthur was silent. He communicated with gestures and, as he got older, with a small whiteboard he carried everywhere, the kind with the plastic cover you could flip down to erase. He was 6 years old, and he hadn't said a word to anyone in nearly 4 years. I used to talk to him anyway, one-sided conversations while we did puzzles together, or when I walked him around the backyard pointing at things. That's a robin, that's a catalpa tree. Your grandmother planted those hostas along the fence and she'd be furious if she saw how I've let them spread. He'd look at where I was pointing. He'd nod. Sometimes he'd find a stick and draw something in the dirt in response. I learned to read him. Not perfectly, but enough. The call came on a Thursday in March. Melissa sounded distracted the way she always did when she called from the car. I could hear the turn signal clicking, then the rush of wind when she cracked the window. Dad, I need a favor. A big one. She and Craig were going to a work conference in Scottsdale. 5 days. She'd had a sitter lined up for 2 months and the woman had broken her wrist. Could Arthur stay with me? Of course he can, I said. I didn't hesitate. There was a pause on her end that I didn't know how to read at the time. He's had some rough weeks, she said. Don't take it personally if he seems withdrawn. I almost laughed. Arthur's baseline was withdrawn. What was below that? They pulled into my driveway Friday afternoon. Craig carried in a duffel bag and Arthur's backpack without making eye contact with me. Melissa hugged me and held on a second longer than usual, which I noticed but didn't remark on. Arthur stood on the porch holding his whiteboard flat against his chest like a shield, watching a cardinal in the catalpa tree. We'll call every night, Melissa said. Craig was already in the car. She kissed the top of Arthur's head and told him to be good, and he didn't look at her when she said it. He kept watching the cardinal. I remember thinking that was odd. Even for Arthur. Then they were gone, and it was just the two of us, and the cardinal, and the sound of the tire swing moving in the breeze. You hungry? I asked. He looked up at me, shook his head. Thirsty. A small nod. Apple juice or the good stuff, by which I mean lemonade I made this morning, not the powder kind, before you get excited. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile. I took it. We fell into a routine fast. Arthur was a kid who liked structure. I'd figured that out over the years. Each morning we had breakfast together. He always wanted scrambled eggs, no pepper. And then he'd spread out at the kitchen table with his drawing supplies while I drank my second coffee and read the paper. Real paper. I'm 70 years behind on that habit, and I'm not changing it. After breakfast, walks. He liked the path behind the subdivision that ran along Alum Creek. I'd narrate the way I always did, and he'd draw things in his little notebook. Birds, mostly, but also the occasional landscape, and once a very accurate rendering of my left boot that I didn't notice him doing. I have a heart condition. Nothing immediately dramatic. A combination of hypertension and a valve that my cardiologist describes as cooperative for now. I take medication every morning. 3 pills with breakfast, 1 at night. I keep them in the original pharmacy bottles in the cabinet above the sink, labeled, organized. Marion used to tease me about it. She said I organized my pills like they were a filing system. On the second morning, I noticed Arthur watching me take my pills. Intently. The way he watched the birds. I didn't think much of it. Kids are curious. I told him what they were. This one keeps my blood pressure where it belongs. This one helps with the valve. This one the doctor added last year, and I still don't entirely understand why. And he nodded slowly, eyes moving from bottle to bottle. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to drawing. That evening, Melissa called. Craig answered on her phone for some reason, which was unusual, and spoke to Arthur for about 45 seconds in a flat, careful voice that struck me as strange. Arthur stood in the hallway holding the phone with both hands. He didn't gesture. He didn't write anything. He just listened. And when it was over, he handed me the phone without expression and went to his room. I said goodnight to Melissa. She got on for a minute, sounded tired. And then I stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling something I couldn't name. Day 3. Arthur was quiet at breakfast, which was not itself unusual, but this was a different quality of quiet. He kept looking at me and then looking at the pill bottles. Looking at me. Looking at the bottles. At one point he reached over and moved the lemonade glass an inch closer to his side of the table. Not to take it, just repositioned it. Like a chess piece. I paid attention to that, but I didn't understand it yet. That afternoon, I was going through some papers at my desk, sorting through bills, the kind of administrative detritus that piles up when you live alone, when Arthur appeared in the doorway. He was holding his whiteboard. He stood there looking at me, and I put my reading glasses down. "What's up, bud?" He looked down at the whiteboard, then back at me. Then he turned around and walked back toward the living room. I followed. He sat down on the couch, whiteboard in his lap. I sat down on the couch, whiteboard in his lap. I sat in my armchair across from him. He wrote something, held the board up, then immediately pulled it back down and erased it before I could read it. His jaw was tight. His knees were pressed together. "Take your time," I said. He looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he wrote again and held the board up. "Are you going to take your pills tomorrow morning?" I looked at the question. "Well, yeah," I said. "Same as every morning." "Why?" He erased it and wrote again. "What if they were wrong?" My chest did something complicated. "Wrong how?" I said, keeping my voice even. "Like the wrong prescription?" He erased. Wrote, "Wrong pills. Different pills. Someone put them in your bottles." The room got very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the street. I looked at my grandson's face. He was watching me the way he watched the cardinal in the catalpa tree. Completely still, measuring whether I was going to dismiss this. I said, "Arthur, are you telling me someone switched my medication?" He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded. "I want to tell you I stayed calm. I want to say I handled it with the kind of steady, measured response you'd hope for from a 67-year-old man who's been around long enough to know that panic solves nothing. What I actually did was sit very still for about 30 seconds while my brain tried to catch up to what my grandson had just told me. "Who?" I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. He picked up the whiteboard, set it down, picked up a whiteboard, set it down, picked it up again, wrote, "Dad." 1 word, The board was shaking slightly. Or maybe his hands were. I looked at my son-in-law's name written in a 6-year-old's careful print, and something settled into place. Not like a puzzle piece clicking in, more like a weight dropping. That low, sick certainty. I didn't ask him if he was sure. I knew better than to ask a child who'd held on to something this long whether he was sure. "When did you see this?" I asked. He wrote, 3 weeks ago. At home. 3 weeks. He'd been carrying this for 3 weeks alone, at 6 years old, in a house with the man who'd done it. I asked him to write down everything he could remember. He did, carefully and slowly, with the whiteboard and then on 3 sheets of paper from my desk when there wasn't enough space. The story came out in pieces. He'd woken up early and come downstairs for water. He'd heard his father in the kitchen. He'd stood in the hallway and watched through the gap in the door. His father had the pill bottles from my medicine cabinet. Melissa must have had a spare key, and he was working methodically, opening each one, swapping capsules from a different container he brought in a Ziploc bag. Arthur had stood there in the dark hallway in his pajamas and watched and understood enough of what he was seeing to know that it was wrong, deeply wrong, even if he didn't have the vocabulary for exactly why. He'd been too afraid to tell his mother. He was afraid she knew. He was afraid she didn't know, and he didn't know which was worse. He'd told no one. Until now. 3 days into his visit, watching me line up my bottles every morning with Marian's cedar smell still faint in the kitchen, he'd decided I needed to know. I reached over and took the whiteboard out of his hands and set it on the coffee table. Then I sat forward with my elbows on my knees and looked at him directly. "I believe you," I said. "I want you to know that first. I believe every word." His face changed. Something released. His shoulders came down about 2 inches, and he suddenly looked very, very young and very, very tired. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "Whatever happens next, what you just did took more courage than most adults have." He looked at his lap. "Can I hug you?" I asked. He thought about it for a moment, which was exactly the right response, and then he nodded. So I moved to the couch and put my arm around my grandson, and we sat there for a while with the lawnmower still going somewhere down the street and the afternoon light going orange through the front window. I didn't take my pills that morning. I discreetly set them aside while Arthur was watching, showed him I wasn't touching them. He visibly relaxed. Then I called my neighbor Jim, who is 72 and paranoid enough to have a Ring camera on every exterior wall and a son who's a pharmacist in Westerville. I asked Jim's son if he could come over quietly and tell me whether what was in my bottles matched what was on my labels. I didn't explain why. He's a good kid. He came over in 40 minutes. He was there for 20. When he came downstairs, his face was carefully arranged in a way that told me everything before he spoke. What was in 2 of my bottles was not what the labels said. He couldn't tell me exactly what it was without proper testing. But he was certain the capsule sizes and colorings didn't match the listed medications. After he left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I called the Columbus Police Department's non-emergency line. Then on their advice, I called the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. Then I called a lawyer, a man named Robert from my church congregation whose practice handles estate and family law. And I told him everything in one long, measured explanation while Arthur sat at the kitchen table drawing birds and pretending not to listen. I didn't call Melissa. Not yet. The lawyer advised me not to. The investigation moved faster than I expected. My medical records showed I'd been taking the switched medications for what would have been starting the following week. The trip to Scottsdale, I realized, had been timed as a window. By the time they returned, if I'd followed my normal routine, I would have been taking the wrong medication for 5 days. My cardiologist, when I reached her the following morning, went very quiet. Then she said she needed me to come in immediately. When I did, she explained that what had been substituted, based on the preliminary testing, would have interacted badly with my existing valve condition. Badly was the word she used. She used it carefully, which told me it meant something worse than badly. Craig had a life insurance policy on me, a large one. I didn't know it existed. I'd apparently signed something years ago at a family gathering. Melissa thought it was routine paperwork from Craig's financial planning business, which was how he described it. She found out about the policy the same way I did, when the investigators told us both. I still don't know the full shape of what Melissa knew or didn't know. That investigation was separate and it was long, and I won't characterize it here because it's still something I'm trying to find the honest answer to. What I know is that she cooperated fully when it mattered, and that she spent the first night after Craig's arrest sitting in my kitchen until 2 a.m., not saying much, just being there, which is maybe the most she knew how to offer. Craig was arrested on a Tuesday. The charges included attempted poisoning, insurance fraud, and 2 counts related to the financial documents. His lawyer made arguments. None of them worked. There's a moment I come back to. The morning after I first put the pills aside, the day Jim's son came over, Arthur and I walked the creek path like normal. He had his notebook. I had my coffee in the travel mug Marion bought me. We walked for about 40 minutes without any unusual communication, which is to say without him writing anything down. Just walking. At one point he stopped at a spot where the path dips close to the water and the willow tree trails its branches down to the surface. He stood there watching the creek move. I stood beside him. Then, without preamble, in a voice so soft I thought I might have imagined it, he said, "Grandpa." One word, barely above a whisper. Hoarse, like something that had been stored in a dry place for a long time and needed air. I didn't react dramatically. I've thought about this since, whether I should have, whether the moment deserved more. But I think what I actually did was the right thing, which was to say in an equally quiet voice, "Yeah, bud, I'm right here." He looked at the willow branches in the water for another moment. Then he picked up his notebook and kept walking. He didn't say anything else that day. But something had opened. A door he'd cracked just enough to let light through. Over the next few months, the words came back incrementally, not like a flood. More like how certain plants come back after a hard winter, a little at a time, testing the ground, pulling back if something felt wrong, trying again when it didn't. His speech therapist, who I started attending sessions with after the dust settled, said that what Arthur had done, choosing to speak at a moment of genuine high-stakes connection, was actually clinically consistent with how selective mutism sometimes breaks. The right relationship, the right moment, the right reason. The custody situation resolved with me being appointed his primary guardian. Melissa is involved. She calls every Sunday. She takes him for long weekends every month. And I can see her working in real time on becoming a person her son can trust. It's slow and it's not my story to characterize. But I watch Arthur on the phone with her and the wariness in his face has softened some over the past year. Which is more than I had a right to hope for. He's 7 now. He talks more than he doesn't. He still has the whiteboard, uses it sometimes when he's overwhelmed or when he can't find the right word fast enough. But mostly we just talk. Over breakfast, on the creek path, in the car, he asks me questions I don't know the answers to, which is the best kind, because then we have to look things up together. He wanted to know last week why willow trees grow near water. We spent an hour on it. Roots that seek moisture. A structure that can absorb flooding without breaking. "That's kind of what you did," I said, before I could stop myself. "You bent, but you didn't break." He thought about that for a second. Then he said, "You didn't break either, Grandpa." I had to look out the window for a minute. I tell this story because I want someone to understand something clearly. The child saw something no adult saw. He sat with it alone in the hardest possible circumstances, and he chose the right moment to let it be known. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He walked into my living room with his whiteboard, and he handed me the truth, quietly, and waited to see if I was the kind of person who deserved it. I want to be that person. Every day since, I try to be that person. He taught himself, in 4 years of silence, to read the world more carefully than most people do in a lifetime. He learned which silences meant danger and which meant safety. He learned that trust isn't automatic, it's earned. And when it's real, it's worth risking everything for. The tire swing in the backyard moves in the wind. The hostas are still spreading along the fence. Marion's cedar cleaner is still under the sink. And most mornings, before the school bus comes, a 7-year-old boy with his grandmother's eyes and more courage than I'll ever fully comprehend sits across from me at the kitchen table eating scrambled eggs, no pepper, and tells me about a bird he saw. I listen to every word. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened in my kitchen that Thursday morning. Not the legal part, the human part. The part where a 6-year-old boy who hadn't spoken a word to another person in 4 years looked across a table at an old man with pill bottles lined up like a filing system and made a decision. He could have stayed quiet. That was the safer thing. He'd been staying quiet for years, and staying quiet had kept him alive inside that house. He understood. The way children understand things that adults underestimate. That speaking up carried a cost. He'd watched his father. He knew what that man was capable of. And still, he picked up his whiteboard and walked into my living room and handed me the truth. That's not something you're born knowing how to do. That's something that gets built, quietly, slowly, in the spaces between fear and love, through years of watching and learning and figuring out who in the world is actually safe. Arthur spent 4 years reading people the way he read birds, tracking behavior, filing it away. He didn't speak because he was waiting, I think now, until he had something worth the risk of saying. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who tried to write him off, who looked at his silence and decided there was nothing there worth listening to. They were wrong in a way that nearly killed me. And they were wrong in a way that eventually destroyed them, not because the world punishes that kind of carelessness in some automatic, tidy way, but because when you dismiss a person's intelligence long enough, you stop accounting for them. You forget to be careful around them. You assume they don't see what you're doing. Craig assumed Arthur didn't understand what he was watching from that hallway. That assumption was the unraveling of everything Craig had built. There's something in that I think about whenever I feel tempted to give up on a person, particularly a quiet one, the ones who aren't performing their intelligence for you. The ones who seem to be somewhere else. Sometimes they are somewhere else. And sometimes they're right there, taking in everything, waiting for the moment it matters to act on it. Arthur didn't save my life by being loud or dramatic. He saved it by being careful and precise and brave in a way that cost him something real. He spoke one word in a voice scraped dry from years of disuse, and that one word was my name, and it was enough. I think about what I owe him for that, not in a transactional way. I don't mean I owe him a debt. I mean that the gift of a second chance has a weight to it, and the right response to that weight is to carry it with intention. To show up every morning, to listen when he talks, to be the kind of person who deserved to be trusted in the first place. He's 7 now. He tells me things over scrambled eggs. He asks questions I can't answer, and we look them up together. He's teaching me still every day, just louder than before.